Hi, welcome back to another Serging tip clip. In an earlier tip clip, I had shown you how to do a lettuce edge, and I think I referred to it for doing on the hem of either a jersey, a skirt, a dress. You can use it for a million different things, shorts even, and it's most effective with knit fabrics. But today I wanted to show you how to use it to create a decorative seam on a skirt. And the skirt you're going to see in the still pictures is on my videographer, Megan. And it looked at first, when I saw the fabric in the fabric store, like a gauze fabric. It's kind of crinkly. And then when I went over to it and I handled it, I realized it was a knit. And I thought, wow, that would be really cute in my Stockbridge skirt pattern. And so I made it up. And instead of just doing a regular serge seam on the 8 seams, I decided I would use the lettuce edge to make it decorative. Now, the only place that I didn't use it was on the side seams, only because I felt as though who needs any extra width on their hips? But if you want to use it on it, you certainly can. So let me show you how I did that, and I'll give you a few tips for different threads and techniques to go with it. So I'll see you over at the machine. Before I go to the machine, I just wanted to give you a close-up of this stitch. This is my sewing machine stitching line right here, and I did it in red on my sample fabric that you'll see in a couple of minutes to give it better visibility with the camera. And I lettuce edged the seam allowance on this. And I know people will ask how I hemmed the skirt. Well, because it's knit, I left it raw, and it's not only because it's knit and it won't ravel, but also a lot of times with the rolled hems, if you have to go over a seam allowance with another rolled hem on it, or anything with any thickness or bulk, sometimes it's hard to get the rolled hem edge going across it to look perfect. And again, because it's a knit fabric, I didn't have to worry about the raveling. So the answer to the question of how I hemmed it is I didn't. So. And let me just quickly show you. I'm going to put this off to the side. And here is my sample fabric. And you can see I've sewn the seam allowance at the designated width, which is about a 1/2 inch. And because this is going vertically, it has a little bit less stretch in the vertical direction, but enough to be able to lettuce the edge. But obviously, if I were going across, what you typically would do for that, I'd have much more stretch and be able to lettuce it enough or a little bit more. And this is exactly what my side seams look like on the constructed skirt. Just typical, only done with the right sides together, not the wrong. This is the wrong side of this knit. So I'll see you over at the machine, and I'll give you a few tips for getting a great result with this technique. I have my machine almost set up for a rolled hem. I am in the right overlock needle, and on my machine that's the O2 needle. And I have serger cone thread in that needle and in the lower looper as well. I'm using woolly nylon in the upper looper. That's the thread that shows the most on a rolled hem. And woolly nylon, and there is also one that is a woolly polyester. It's kind of fuzzy and very, very soft, and it has a little bit of stretch to it, and it gives excellent edge coverage. So it's really, really nice on rolled hems. But if you have an air threading machine, it doesn't always love to go through the threading ports because it is so light and fluffy. So I'm going to show you how I put it through. I'm going to flip my lever from serging to threading to engage my threading tubes. And I have what's called a thread cradle. And that's just regular thread. And I have cut a long length and folded it in half. And what I'm going to do is insert the 2 cut ends into my upper looper threading port. So I'm going to put those in. And as I said, this is just regular. You can use serger cone thread, all-purpose thread, whatever you want. And what this is going to do is just kind of act like a lasso to pull the fluffy thread through the here we go. So now these cut ends are through the eye of the upper looper, and I have the end with the little loop, or like a lasso, to pull my woolly nylon through. So what I'm going to do is, those cut ends are still over there. I'm just going to put my woolly nylon right through the loop of the thread cradle, just like that. And then all I'm going to do is pull that through, and that'll bring it right up and through the eye of the looper. So now I'm all threaded up. Before I start stitching, I want to give you my settings as well. As I said, I have my right overlock needle threaded with serger cone thread. I have my stitch width down to a narrower setting, just a little bit shorter than or narrower than 3 millimeters. And I have my stitch finger disengaged, so I am on the rolled hem setting on my stitch length dial, and I have the stitch length set at about 1.5. It's a short stitch. On this machine, I have a stitch selector, and I'm on D as in delicate. That gives me a rolled hem, and it tightens the lower looper tension on the thread. And for my differential feed, I've dropped that down to 0.6. I have it lower than the normal or neutral setting because I want to actually stretch the edge only of my seam allowance. And that's going to give me a little bit of waving. And then I'll show you how to make it a little more ruffly. So here is my 1/2 inch seam allowance right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch along and trim off a half or maybe even a little bit more of that seam allowance. So it's going to be about a scant 1/4 inch wide when we finish up. But this is the designated seam allowance on the pattern itself. But however much I trim off on the seam allowance, as long as I know the skirt fits, then I'm fine. So I'm going to line that up so that the knife trims off just a little bit more than half of it. Okay, let's start stitching along. Now, I originally said I had my stitch length at 1.5, but actually for these 2 layers of knit fabric, they're not what I would call bulky, but they're a little bit thicker than a single layer that you would typically be doing this on. I decided to move my stitch length up to just a little bit shorter than 2. And I think that's going to work better going through the double layer because we are stitching the 2 seam allowances together, not separately. So let's see how that does. And that's working fine. Now, you can see it doesn't look wavy or ruffly at all. I've trimmed that seam allowance way down. And let me just cut my little thread tails at either end. And let's see if we can get this to look nice and ruffly. And what I like to do is what I call my pinch and pull method. I don't like to pull the fabric as it's being stitched, only because on some fabrics, the stitch has a tendency to sort of bounce off the edge. But by pinching and pulling just on the seam allowance alone, it will allow it to ruffle along. And I'm just pulling probably little 1-inch increments on it. And you can see how it's starting to ruffle up. But this way I know when I pinch and pull it after the stitching is complete, that the stitch is not going to go anywhere. It's not going to fall off the edge of the fabric at all. And it's very secure. So you can see how this is ruffling. And again, if I were going crosswise in my direction for this, on the stretchier direction of this knit, I would even get a little bit more ruffling. But this is still enough to be very effective. And sometimes I'll go over it and I'll pull it 2 or 3 times just to get the look that I want. So you can see how I am getting a nice little ruffly edge on that, just like that. And so on a seam, let me open this up, where both seam allowances are together. It's really cute. It's a very fun little seam treatment and decorative treatment that isn't just for hems alone. So I hope you try it out on a garment that you're using, just as a fun, nice way to give a little more interest to your seams. Thanks for joining me in another Serging tip clip. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to send them along. And I always like to get ideas for new Serging tip clips and know what's on your mind. And if you'd like to post any photos or send them along to me, with your permission, I'll be happy to post them on my Facebook page and on Instagram. Thanks so much. See you soon.